I want to talk today about how to maneuver and engage the Amplatz Left guide, and I will describe as well other RCA guides and engagement tips. I suggest that you review under my playlist cardiac catheterization techniques, several other videos I provided about engagement techniques, whether for the right coronary, left coronary, and for grafts. Amplatz Left 1 is my favorite transradial RCA guide. The other guide I like and I use that is very supportive is Ikari Left 4 to 4.5 size usually. Even for ostial RCA PCI, I use Ikari Left or Amplatz Left 0.75 to 1, but not in power position. I do not use a GR4. GR4 during radial intervention, I believe, is very poorly supportive and unstable. Now, in transfemoral interventions, I can use a GR4. I think it's okay. You do get okay support from transfemoral GR4. But for complex intervention, Amplatz Left is still the guide of choice, and you can use 0.75 to 1. I would use 1 transradially, but 0.75 to 1 transfemorally. The radial axis shortens and loops the RCA catheters, so much so that you may need slightly larger curves from a radial axis than from a femoral axis for the RCA. Amplatz Left is not only important for RCA engagement, it's important in all complex coronary interventions. You can use it for the left coronary, where you typically use AL2 for a normal aortic size or AL3 for a large aorta. We use AL 0.75 to 1 for the RCA and AL 1.5 to 2 for left vein graft. It's also valuable in anomalous coronaries, as I've described in my anomalous coronary video. This is the Amplatz Left. It's a catheter with a duck shape and a big butt. You see, this is the big butt characteristic of the Amplatz Left. The difference between Amplatz Left 1, 2, and 3 is the length of that tip. Amplatz Left provides support in two ways. One, via that big butt sitting on the aortic valve and partially on the opposite aortic wall. Number two, via deep elongated coaxial inside the coronary. These are the two ways Amplatz Left provides support. Big butt, duck shape sitting on the aortic valve and the opposite aortic wall, or elongated with a long bulk of catheter deep in the coronary. So how do we engage the Amplatz Left? And I will mainly focus on the RCA, and I will give some explanation about a vein graft toward the end. So one, you advance the Amplatz Left in an elongated fashion over the wire all the way to the cusp of interest, in this case, the right cusp. And while it's elongated with a free tip, not duck-shaped, it has to be elongated initially with a free tip on the aortic cusp of interest, the right cusp in this case. While it's elongated and free on that right cusp, you start torquing, clocking in this case. Then toward the latter half of the torque, toward the mid or end of that torque, you start pushing to shape it into a duck. You don't want to start pushing from the beginning. You don't want it to be duck-shaped too quickly at the beginning of your torque. You want it to become duck-shaped as you're close to engagement. There are 4 key words in engagement of Amplatz Left. The tip has to be elongated and free on the cusp of interest. Then you start torquing. Then toward the latter half of the torque, you slightly push to make it duck shape. If the duck forms too quickly and the catheter points too much up, you have to stop, pull on the catheter to elongate it again, and make it step free and start over. The reason we don't want the Amplatz left to be fully duck-shaped early on before engagement is that the Amplatz left is a big and bulky catheter, and if you let it to be fully shaped before engagement, it would land too high in the aorta above the right coronary ostium, and you won't be able to engage it. This may be okay in large aorta, but it's not okay in most cases. If the duct forms too quickly before you hook the ostium, it would be already looking up too high, and you will need, like I said, to pull it, to elongate it, and try over again. This is an illustration of AL engagement of the RCA. So here we have an elongated Amplatz left with a free tip, hooking the right cusp. We started clocking while it's free and elongated. Then toward the end, we pushed and engaged in a duck shape. This is another illustration. Here we have the Amplatz left onto the right cusp and elongated. However, it is not free. It feels stuck. So the fellow here tried to torque it while it is somewhat stuck, and he started to push too early. So he did two mistakes. He started to torque it while it was somewhat stuck, not free, and he pushed on it and made it duck shape too early. Like I said, the key words, you have to be elongated and free, and you torque, then toward the mid to end, you push. So those are the mistakes he committed here. Again, the tip was stuck, not free, and he pushed too early before he finished his clock. So what you do when this happens, you restart over. You pull on your catheter to free it, and this is what was done here. So you pull on the catheter to free it, and now you have it elongated with a free tip. Now the tip is free. If it is not free, you need to pull a little bit above the cusp, make it free and elongated. And now you start clocking. And then as you're clocking midway, he pushed on it to give it the duck shape. So here again, elongated and free, clocking, then pushing to make it duck shape toward the midway of clocking. And that achieved successful engagement. This is another illustration. We're advancing the Amplatz left in an elongated fashion all the way to the right cusp. Now it feels stuck, so you have to pull a little bit above that cusp and maybe give it a slight torque, counterclock here, and make it free and elongated onto that right cusp. You have to be onto the right cusp, the cusp of interest. So we reached the cusp of interest and we made it free here. Then, again, while the tip is elongated and free, we clockwise torque, then slightly pushed close to the end, and we successfully engaged. Again, watch it, then push toward the end and successfully engaged. This is another case, same technique in every case. While the tip is elongated and free, we clockwise torque, then slightly push around midway of the torque, and we successfully engaged. And it has the duck shape toward the end of the torque. Those maneuvers can be done while keeping the wire in to provide more torqueability and support, or after taking the wire out. Now I explain how to engage Amplatz left. That's not enough. A lot of the complication of Amplatz left happened as you're trying to disengage it, and especially as you're maneuvering during PCI. This is where you can get that long tip to dissect the right coronary artery. So I will describe first how to disengage the Amplatz left. If your Amplatz left is perfectly duck-shaped and coaxial with the coronary, and you pull it, it will dive deep. So definitely, to disengage Amplatz left, do not pull it if it is duck-shaped and coaxial with the coronary. The way you do it, if your Amplatz left is duck-shaped and coaxial with the coronary, in order to disengage, don't pull, it will dive deep. You actually push to prolapse it out, then you counterclock it to fully prolapse it out. This is what we did here. We pushed, then we counterclocked it out. You know, we clock to engage and we counterclock to disengage after you push it. Here is how we disengage Amplatz left. If it is perfect duck shape, meaning you see a big butt sitting on that aortic valve and coaxial tip with the coronary, don't pull. You need to push to prolapse that tip out a little bit, then counterclock. Conversely, if your Amplatz left is elongated, whether elongated and barely in or elongated and deeper, or if it is duck-shaped but not coaxial, if it is duck-shaped but little looking at us, barely in both those cases, you should just pull the Amplatz to disengage it. Most typically, in those cases, you pull to disengage it. Do all those maneuver under fluoro and react to what you see. If for whatever reason the Amplatz left dives deeper, be ready to readjust. This is an illustration of a case where pulling on the catheter made it dive deep. So the way we maneuvered it is actually by pushing it to prolapse it, then torque it out. This is a case of Amplatz left in a vein graft. So again, push, it prolapses a little bit out, then you fully torque it out. This is a case where the Amplatz left was elongated, somewhat deep and elongated inside the coronary. It wasn't duck-shaped. In that case, just pulling it worked to disengage it. We didn't need to do what we did here, push and torque out. Okay? So it was elongated, we just pulled it. Same if you're duck-shaped but not coaxial. You can also typically pull it. Also, when you disengage a L guide, it is nice to have a wire and a balloon catheter. The last balloon you use, keep it in toward the end, and when you disengage, have it at the tip of the guide, so much so that if you do an erroneous maneuver, that balloon catheter will prevent the tip of the guide from dissecting the coronary. Amplatz left is a catheter that tends to dive deeply inside the coronary, which may be unfavorable in ostial disease. So how to use it in ostial disease? One, I tend to use an Amplatz left that is a little shorter tip, 0.75 instead of 1. Two, I try to avoid being deep with it. It is best to use it in an elongated fashion to be able to pull and push and to allow it to react in a predictable fashion to our hand maneuvers. You push it, it pushes in, you pull it, it pulls out. Now, you can use it in a duck shape in ostial disease, but when you do so, make sure the duck is not coaxial with the ostium. That is how you prevent it from diving too deep. So you make it non-coaxial, and what you can do, you can clock to engage and counterclock to disengage, and having a wire and potentially balloon catheter in prevents that catheter from flying out. Also, sitting on the aortic valve prevents it from flying out and keeps it stable. So you can use it in an elongated fashion where you advance and disengage as needed, or in a duck shape on the aortic valve, but not coaxial. Do not use duck shape coaxial with the coronary. This is an illustration of how you can engage and disengage by clocking and counterclocking without ever getting too deep in the coronary. This is an Ikari left here, but the same idea applies for an Amplatz left that is positioned in a duck shape but non-coaxial. See here how we're not deep in with the duck shape, and we can counterclock out and clock in. This is the windshield wiper maneuver. You counterclock out and clock in. You see, it's like a windshield wiper. Clock, counterclock. You engage and disengage. Now, how to maneuver Amplatz left during the case and prevent dissection? Here's a general idea in any guide PCI manipulation. In general, after you position and deploy your stent, you want to pull your stent out. When you pull your stent out, your guiding catheter will tend to dive deeply in, especially if your stent is across distal calcified tortuous segments. When you pull it out, the guide will tend to dive in. So what we do in those cases, as I'm pulling the stent out with my right hand, my left hand is holding onto the wire, and the palm of it is keeping a pull tension on the guide. So that's an important technique, the palm of the left hand, the palm of the left hand technique, meaning as I'm pulling my stent, the palm of the left hand is keeping a pull tension on the guide, and the fingers are actually not just holding the wire, they are pulling on the wire. So much so that as you're taking the stent out, you're preventing the guide from diving and you're preventing the wire from diving in, okay? And this is how we do it. So I'm pulling on the stent, but that hand, the palm, is actually pulling on the guide and pulling a little on the wire. And under fluoro, you're making sure nothing, the guide and the wire are not diving in. So again, the palm is pulling back on the guide. That technique can be problematic with an Amplatz left guide because Amplatz left guide, it does not always react in a predictable manner. So when you pull on the Amplatz left guide, it may paradoxically dive in, especially when it's duck-shaped and coaxial. And that can happen throughout the case as you're pulling balloon, pulling stent, maneuvering your wire. So that's why throughout your case, you want to position Amplatz left in a way it reacts predictably to push and pull. And how do we do that? Keep in mind that Amplatz left provides guide support in two ways. One, the duck shape, big butt sitting on the aortic valve. That's the support from the aortic valve. And number two, deep engagement with an elongated coaxial Amplatz left guide. So two ways, the duck shape or the deep elongated Amplatz left. Decide at the beginning of your case what shape support you want. If you choose the elongated shape, which tends to be easier to handle, you can, at the beginning, from that duck shape, pull on your catheter, make it elongated in a controlled fashion, so you get support from that deep engagement. And the advantage of the deep engagement is that it responds directly to push and pull, meaning you push it, it dives deeper, but if you keep pushing it, it will become back duck shape. But if you push it to a degree, it will go deeper. If you pull it, it will come out. So it will react directly to your push and pull in a more predictable manner. And you can choose to keep your Amplatz left like this throughout the case. Another technique is to consider using the duck shape for the support from the aortic valve. But when you do the duck shape, don't make it a deep and elongated. Use it in a windshield wiper manner, meaning it's duck shaped. If you want to engage, you clock. If you want to disengage, you counterclock. So use the duck shape, but not deep tip into the RCA. And if you're already deep and you want to use the duck shape, and if you're already deep with it, what you can do, you can push it to kick it a little out. You actually push it to kick it out. Then you rely throughout your case on clocking to engaging and counterclocking to disengaging. And you can alternate. You don't have to get stuck in one morphology. You can alternate between those two morphologies. But the important thing is to do it in a controlled fashion, not surprising and unpredictable manner. Like you go as you're pulling your stent, your guide is all of a sudden jumped from this all the way deep in the coronary. You have to do it in a predictable manner. So you can choose to maneuver your Amplatz left like this, or you can choose like that, or you can switch around in your case under your own control. So you can go from this, you decide, I want to have that duck shape. So you can push it, it will go a little deeper, but you keep pushing it furthermore, it will become duck shaped. And you can use that if you want more robust support for stent advancement. But after you position your stent and you do your complex maneuvering, you have to go back to a base of operation, choosing either this shape or that shape. So from that coaxial duck with deep tip, you can keep the duck shape. You can push it a little more to prolapse the tip out. And now you can use that duck shape in a windshield wiper manner, counterclock out and clock in. Or you can do with this, you can decide to pull it in a controlled manner, make it elongated, then pull and push to maneuver using this. And this is generally what I use. I use this as a base of operation through the case. And when I want extra support, I push and I keep pushing more until I'm not just deep, but also duck shape. I get my stent in. Now, when I want to get my stent out and to do it in a controlled manner, before I pull my stent, I pull my Amplatz left guide back again to make it look like this in a controlled manner. Then I pull a little more on the guide now that it will react directly to what I do, so it's a little disengaged. Then I pull my stent catheter out while the palm of my hand is pulling on the guide so it doesn't dive deeply in. But now I know if I pull on the guide, it will pull out. Here, if I pull on the guide, it will dive in and it will surprise me. So I don't let it do that. I make it go to that shape in a controlled manner. Then I pull my stent out. This is an illustration of a case where we were using the duck shape coaxially to advance a balloon. Then we use an elongated shape at another time. And with the elongated shape, it was easy to disengage and engage as needed during our maneuvering. This elongated shape provided that support from being deep and allowed us to pull out for ostial stent positioning or while pulling out devices. This is another case. We start off with a coaxial duck shape. Then we pulled it for deeper engagement and for more predictability with pull and push. And we did all of our maneuver with push and pull in this position, the deep elongated coaxial guide. See how it is deep and elongated here in the coronary, but it's not duck-shaped on the aortic valve. And at the end, to disengage it, because it's elongated and not duck-shaped, we just pulled it out. This is another case here where we were maneuvering the Amplatz left in a windshield wiper manner. We will counterclock to disengage and clock to engage as needed when we need to advance our devices or when we need to pull out our devices. Also as needed for ostial stent positioning. I will move on now to explain how to engage left vein graft with Amplatz Left. I typically use large AL 1.5 and most typically 2 to engage left vein graft. And the way I do it, again, we advance the Amplatz Left in an elongated fashion, and while the tip is free and elongated, we torque all the way to hook the ostium or the aorta, then we push it to give it the duck shape. So it's kind of similar to the native coronary, except you clock all the way before pushing it to give it the duck shape. You have to hook and engage, then you push it to give it the duck shape. You don't push before you have engaged yet. This is an illustration of that. This is an Amplatz Left 2 engaging vein graft to diagonal. So again, you see at the beginning, it's elongated with a free tip. We're clocking here, trying to hook that ostium of the vein graft. We're trying. And here, once we hooked it, then we pushed it to give it a duck shape and to make it point up and be coaxial with that upward looking left vein graft. This is again, after it hooked it, we pushed it. We really want AL2 in vein graft because you want a size big enough to abut the opposite ascending aorta and give you support, left vein graft being difficult intervention requiring a lot of support. This is an illustration of another case. Again, we have elongated and free AL. We're torquing to hook that ostium in an RAO view, and once we hooked it, we pushed it to give it the duck shape and make it look coaxially upward. I want to move on to describe Ikari Left guide for RCA engagement. These are the guiding catheter for right coronary. Do not use a Judkins right. It's unstable and it's not supportive from a transradial access. Ikari Left is one of the best guides. It's my second option beside Amplatz Left. So it's Ikari Left for RCA. You can use Ikari Right, but Ikari Left is actually better. And Ikari Right has a morphology somewhat similar to Amplatz Left, particularly Ikari Right 1.5. Ikari Right 1.5 is very similar to Amplatz Left 1. Ikari Right 1 has a shorter tip. This tip here with Ikari Right 1 is shorter. And Ikari Right 1 is somewhat in between JR4 and Ikari Right 1.5. It is a less aggressive catheter, less supportive, but less aggressive as well. It can be used in somewhat simple RCA intervention. So simple RCA intervention, if you want to use Ikari Right, you use Ikari Right 1. If you want in complex intervention, if you want to use Ikari Right, use Ikari Right 1.5. But my preferred is Amplatz Left 1 or Ikari Left. Ikari Left may be used for simple intervention and for complex intervention. It's very versatile and I'll show how to use it. Ikari Left by itself as a single catheter can be transformed from a GR4-like morphology to an Amplatz Left morphology. So you can engage it and maneuver it like a Judkins Right 4 with a short tip, or you can push it from that GR4 morphology. You can push it into a power position and use it like in Amplatz Left with deep engagement support and opposite aortic wall support, sometimes even aortic cusp support. That's the beauty of that. It's one catheter that behaves like two. So in cases where you have both ostial and distal disease, you can use the JR4 for ostial maneuvering, the JR4 morphology for ostial maneuvering, And you can use the deep supportive shape for distal stent positioning and maneuvering. You push to get that power support, you pull to get that JR4 shape. It's easier to handle than Amplatz Left. Like I explained, you can do somewhat the same thing with an Amplatz Left. With an Amplatz Left, you can use that elongated morphology. You can use that elongated morphology and pull it for ostial maneuvering, then push it for distal maneuvering, and you can even push it more to make it duck shape and deep for distal maneuvering. Now, when I use Ikari Left, I tend to use a larger Ikari Left, 4 to 4.5 for the right coronary. Keep in mind, an idea I mentioned before is that the radial axis makes the right catheters more looped, shortened, and upward looking. Because they become looped and upward looking, I like a longer arm Ikari to engage the right coronary artery. That's kind of the same reason why I like AL1 from a radial axis for the RCA, whereas AL.75 is often okay from a femoral axis. The way you engage Ikari right for the right coronary artery is similar to the Judkins right. You go with your catheter over the wire all the way to the right cusp, which is the lower cusp compared to the left cusp. This is the right cusp. Then you pull with a clockwise torque, 90 to 180 degree clockwise torque. This is an illustration of that. So here we are on the right cusp and we pulled with a clockwise torque. Very easy engagement. Then from that, you can push it to create the Amplatz Left power position, or you pull it to keep the JR4 position. This is an illustration of an Ikari Left. Here we're using it like a JR4. We pushed it to create a partial power position, a partial Amplatz here to get more support, and we pushed it more to get even a bigger Amplatz Left support. That's why Ikari Left 4 can be very, very supportive. You can get partial power position or full power position. That deep push engagement of the Ikari Left is called power position. This is another illustration of that deep power position. So the catheter is deep and it's sitting on the opposite aorta and on the right cusp aortic valve. And you can pull it back to create a GR4 shape. And here we're showing how we're pushing it to get that power position. This is an Ikari Left that is used almost like in a JR4 fashion, not deep in, not power position, and we're using it in a windshield wiper manner. Counterclock to get it out and clock to get it in. This is a useful technique when treating the ostium. In this particular patient, we were stenting and ballooning the ostium of the RCA. This is an illustration of an Ikari Left 4 that we pushed to make it like an Amplatz Left 1, but an Amplatz Left 1 that is barely engaged, not deep elongated. So it's very versatile in the way you can use it. Keep in mind, like with any general RCA engagement, keep in mind those 5 caveats that I explained in the past and that I will explain again in another talk. As you're engaging with a JR4 or Ikari right or Ikari Left, the catheter tip can come too low after the torque, can come too low here. It can come too high, in which case you need to counterclock, push down and restart over. The catheter is at the beginning in the left cusp, and you are starting your maneuvers from the left cusp, which is higher than the right cusp. And if you torque from the left cusp, you'll end up coming too high. In this case, you need to push your catheter from the left cusp to the right cusp and start pulling with a clockwise torque afterward. The fourth caveat is an anterior RCA takeoff that you couldn't engage with the standard maneuvers, in which case you preferably need AL, or at the very least, you need to know that for an anterior RCA, you need to engage by making the catheter look at you in an LAO view rather than look to the right side of the aorta, or you may use an RAO view to engage. The fifth caveat being the elongated horizontal aorta. This is the elongated horizontal aorta. In this case, the RCA origin is too low on the horizontal portion of the aorta, not on the vertical portion of the aorta. You need to be aware of that. Once your catheter is on the vertical portion of the aorta, you're already way too high. So you need to aim to that low horizontal portion of the aorta. This is the case where the catheter comes too low in comparison to the coronary ostium. Keep in mind the RCA is on top of the coronary sinus of Valsalva, about 1.5 centimeters above the right cusp. See, so if on non-selective puff you see the nest, you are too low. If you see the convexity of the tubular aorta, you are too high. And here you are too low, you counterclock slightly, you pull, then you slightly clock to engage, then you push it in. Here you're too high, you counterclock, you push it back down, then you clock and pull to engage. And you pull a little less than you did the first time. Here, a catheter that is in the left coronary cusp, if you clock from here, you'll end up coming too high. You need to get that catheter down all the way here, whether by pushing it or by giving it a counterclock to make it look in this direction, then push it down, then clock and pull back to engage. And here is the anterior RCA takeoff, where you need to use RAO view to engage, or you can use LAO, but make your catheter look toward you. Keep in mind, in cases where GR4 was the only catheter you could use to engage the coronary, or if you've used a GR4 and you wired and you notice that the GR4 is not giving you enough support, but you don't want to switch your gear and disengage and start over with an Amplatz left. What you can do in those cases is convert a GR4 into an Amplatz left, practically using a guideliner. Consider advancing up front before even you do your maneuvering, just because you know GR4 is not going to be good. Advance up front a guideliner and create with the guideliner or guide extension, create an Amplatz left morphology. This is an illustration here of how we create an Amplatz left shape using a guideliner. So this is a GR4, the tip of it here, and this is the guideliner. It finishes here, and this is an Amplatz left shape created with the guideliner. This is another way. This is a GR4, finishes here, and this is the guide extension, finishing here, and an Amplatz left shape. Consider using, in those cases, the Guidezilla 40 centimeter instead of 25 centimeter to provide more stability and to allow you to get out of the guiding catheter with some distance without losing support and stability.